The annual NBA GM survey is out, and 57% of the voters say that Paul George is the offseason acquisition that will have the most impact this season, followed by Jimmy Butler, 17%, Chris Paul, 10%, Kyrie Irving, 70% of the vote. Stephen A., do you agree that PG-13 is the best offseason move?
If you're talking about him as an individual talent, yes.
Okay.
Because I think that he's the kind of transcendent, he's flourishing into that kind of transcendent star that you need to look at him that way. But analyzing the game of basketball, looking at the respective teams that they're on and the teammates that they're playing with, I'm going to say I respectfully disagree with that. My selection will be Chris Paul. Here is why. Couple of things. And in the interest of full disclosure, I spoke to Chris Paul yesterday, okay? And I'll just leave it at that.
I'm sure he was very happy with what we had to say yesterday on the air.
Well, he was cool with me.
Real happy with you.
He was cool with me. He was cool with me. He didn't. Seriously speaking, he doesn't. He's got thick skin, but his whole thing is about understanding the game of basketball and understanding what he brings to the table. And his mentality is that Luke Mbamute is there with them. Jamal Crawford's gone. DeAndre Jordan's with the Clippers. But, ask him where he wants to be, those kind of things. But that's a subject for another day. Here's the reality, and it's incredibly important that everybody understands this. Chris Paul has been desperately wanting to play with a star shooting guard, but also with the ability to play the point, because he loves J.J. Redick. But J.J. Redick is a shooter. Wherever Chris Paul has played, from New Orleans to the Los Angeles Clippers, when he was on the court, I'm not talking about teammates, who he was on the court with, he always had a vast majority of ball handling responsibilities. He doesn't want that. He wants somebody else to be able to do it too, to share that responsibility with somebody. James Harden learned that to some degree he wants that too. Yeah, he doesn't mind being a point, but it was too much when at the end of the day, D'Antoni had to put the ball in his hands 99% of the time, because it showed itself in Game 6 when the imposter was wearing his jersey against San Antonio. Because of Chris Paul and his floor generalship, combined with the fact that he's going to have the ability to play off the ball, and him and James Harden are interchangeable in that regard, combined with the three-point shooters that they have on Houston, the Eric Gordons of the world, to a lesser degree, the Trevor Ariza's, of course, Harden, etc., and Chris Paul himself shooting 41% from the field. Their belief is that they're going to have a profound impact because offensively they're going to be a juggernaut. What I see with Paul George is that you've got to share with Melo and Russell Westbrook to a degree, so you got to figure that out, even though you're a three-headed monster. Whereas with Chris Paul, him and James Harden pretty much will be the show. And I think
there's so much to watch in the NBA this year. It's going to be amazing.
Right.
And one of those things that will be very interesting is James Harden and Chris Paul. I wish them luck. My comments yesterday about Chris Paul were people don't look happy to be playing with him, and maybe he feels maybe the situation wasn't happy, period. Time will tell.
That's what he
feels.
Always does.
The
situation wasn't happy. Don't look at him about it. He's got plenty of dudes that want to play with him.
Paul George is the best player who was moved in the offseason, or who moved in the offseason. He is, when you look at the history of the NBA, even nowadays where it's all point guards and stretch fours, no, actually what's always won championships, even today, are two-way wings and bigs, right? And you think about the greatest players in history who weren't bigs, who won all the championships. Michael Jordan, two-way wing, off-ball a lot of the time, obviously. Kobe Bryant, the same thing. Mm-hmm. LeBron James, the same thing.
Right.
What put Warriors over the top where it's like, okay, no one has a chance? KD, the same thing. And Paul George is a version of that. But there's another version of that. While maybe he's not quite as good as Paul George because he's not quite as tall, really, boy, the impact of this guy has a chance to be the biggest, and that's Jimmy Butler. He's going to a place with an emerging big in Karl Anthony Towns, not to mention Wiggins. That team is not only going to be amazing to watch, but they have a chance to realign the constellation of stars, like the hierarchy of teams in the Western Conference sooner than later, depending on Karl Anthony Towns' development and how Jimmy Butler meshes. But when you talk about high-impact movement, player movement within the NBA, Stephen A., I don't think we've talked enough about Butler moving teams. Paul George is better because he's a little taller, or he is taller. That's what makes him better. Although, at the end of a game, who would you rather see with the ball in their hands, Butler or Paul George? Like, Butler has a certain kind of toughness about his game as a two-way player, and given the leverage move that he is, I think it's actually Butler that's the biggest deal.
You may be right. I don't think so because I think he's more of a scorer than a shooter. And I think when you look at CP3, this is my last comment.
Yep.
What you must take into consideration is not him, the individual, and what he's going to do, but what he's also going to help James Harden do. As prolific as James Harden is, he might actually be better because he's finally with that point guard who's a true point guard who also has the ability to take some of the pressure off of him, thereby enabling him to be more fresh as the season wanes. Look out for that possibility. That's why I say Chris Paul.